So this is the assembly for our prosthetic leg. As you can see from the side here, the majority of our mates were coincident and concentric mates. And this is due to the fact that a lot of our parts, mostly the ones that are flat, needed to be attached to each other, where coincident came very handy. On the other hand, there were a lot of our parts that were rounded or circular, and therefore the concentric mates were often very helpful in those situations. So first of all, I'm going to go through the very top of the leg, starting off with the thigh housing along with the knee. So as you can see, there are 4 coincident mates, and these were all used to attach the knee housing to the thigh housing. And see, it's often the upper part of the teeth, which forms the top of the knee housing, that is coincident with various parts of the thigh housing. So that's how the top assembly was made. And that's because all of the parts were flat, and it's very easy to connect sides with other sides, and also sides with faces. So now here we can see a concentric mate, and this is due to the fact that a rod was placed through the circle. We had to align the rod with the circle, both of which are circular, and therefore concentric mate was the preferred one here. And this was the rod that was going through the knee gear pinion. Also, concentric was used due to the fact that there was a hole for our middle gear, along with holes in the housing, and we wanted those to align to allow the rod to go through them. Next, we can see 2 more coincident mates. So the first coincident mate was to align a knee pinion and pretty much center it. So the faces that corresponded to each other were then made coincident, so everything would be right in the middle. This also applied to the sides, and we also wanted pretty much once again everything to line up, and therefore coincident was used on the faces to assure that the corresponding faces will line up in the middle. And here's another concentric mate. This was the rod. My mistake, the earlier concentric mate was the one that was made between the knee gear and the sides. In this case, a concentric mate was made between the rod and the knee gear pinion, and that was to insert the rod into the gear. And this is a coincident mate, and that was pretty much to secure the rod in place to make sure that it wouldn't move side to side. Now we can see that there is another concentric mate, and this concentric mate was used to connect the knee gear to the top pylon. And that was due to the fact that the bottom portion of the knee gear had a circular portion that was meant to be inserted into the top pylon. And therefore, once again, as both parts were circles, it was best for there to be a concentric mate for one part to fit into the other. Next is coincident mate, and that was to assure that once the parts were concentric, that they wouldn't move up or down, and they were attached to a piece. So in this case, the pylon top, or at least the top circular face of the pylon, was made coincident with the bottom flat face of the knee gear to assure that the pylon was firmly attached. Next, we can see 2 concentric mates, and these concentric mates were first of all used to attach the 2 pylons together, as we wanted one pylon to slide into the other pylon, and therefore a concentric mate there. As this pylon was made to be adjustable, it was not fully constrained, as we meant for the parts to be able to move up and down. The second concentric mate is the one made with the bottom pylon to the heel, and that was to assure that the bottom pylon would be able to fit into the open top cylinder of the upper ankle joint. There was an additional coincident mate that was made between the top heel and the overall right plane of the assembly, and that once again is made to make sure that everything is aligned up at the center. Another concentric mate was made between the top heel and the bottom heel to form the overall ankle joint. And that was because there is a circular cut that went through both of the ankle joints, which a rod will be placed in eventually, and due to that, the holes must be aligned with one another. And as they're circular, the concentric mate was preferred. Now we can see that there is a coincident mate between the two ankle joints, and that is to firmly secure the bottom ankle joint within the top ankle joint. And that's just to prevent movement in any direction while assuring that the holes are also lined up. Now we can see that there are two more concentric mates, and these concentric mates are made to assure that the ankle joint is fitted with the foot base. As there are two holes on both sides of the foot base for the rod to go through, we want the rod to be able to go through both sides of the foot base along with both ankle joints at the center. And thus there's a concentric mate made on the left side and a concentric mate made on the right side, just to fully assure that everything aligns up for the rod to go through smoothly. And now we can see that the foot is also coincidentally mated with the right plane once again to align everything. After this, a parallel mate was made between the knee gear pinion and the final foot, and that is to make sure that the foot is not at a weird angle, it is not flopping around, but it is firmly on the ground and aligned with the knee gear, as we want currently a straight foot for our assembly. Now we can see the placement of the rod into the foot. And first of all, it's a concentric mate to make sure that the rod is aligned circularly with the hole. And then there is a coincident mate to make sure that the rod fits in firmly and will not move in and out of the hole. We can see here now that there is now the coincident mate made between the bottom pylon and the top heel. And as mentioned earlier, there was a concentric mate, but now there is a coincident mate as the bottom pylon is meant to fit in securely with the ankle joint. It is not meant to move out of the ankle joint, and it wants to fit securely in it. So this coincident mate is to make sure that the bottom circular face of the pylon is pretty much glued on inside of the top ankle joint. Next we have a distance mate, and this distance mate is currently used on the bottom part of the knee housing along with the top face of the foot base, and that pretty much is used to create, or pretty much right now set in the distance or how tall the leg should be at this moment. We can see here after this now that there are several more coincident mates, and these mates are to make sure that everything is firmly set with each other and not meant to move. So this coincident mate here is between the foot base and the bottom portion of the heel. And this is because in our initial design, the bottom portion of the heel was meant to be glued on to the bottom foot to act as a support. And we don't want that bottom ankle joint to be turning anywhere, to be moving anywhere, and we want the bottom portion of that to be securely glued on to the foot base. We can see here after this, we can see another coincident mate, and this coincident mate is pretty much made to make sure that the top portion of the knee housing is firmly attached to the thigh housing, or the bottom of the thigh housing, and is meant to be glued together in physical assembly. And we can see that that coincident was made. And now we can see that there is another distance mate, and this distance mate is pretty much to assure where parts of the knee housing is made in relation to the thigh housing, and this pretty much is used just to kind of gauge where that portion of the knee housing would be, to make sure that portion is not going to be moving, and we want to ensure that there's enough room between the thigh housing and that portion of the knee housing. Finally, we have a coincident mate between the right plane and the corresponding face of the thigh holder to assure that the thigh holder is also centered directly in the assembly. This finally creates everything to be firmly in the middle. Everything is lined up with one another and everything is in the middle. And that is our assembly, with coincident mates primarily used to glue things together, and coincident mates are used to align up holes and assure that things such as rods will go through those holes smoothly and in place.